They told me that blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that blood can be toxic. My name is Dr. Simone Vance, and for 6 years my parents have pretended I am dead. They returned my wedding invitation marked, "Addressee deceased." They missed my medical school graduation to go on a cruise with my sister. But last night, when the attending physician walked into the trauma room to save their golden child, my mother grabbed my father's arm so hard she left bruises. She was terrified, not because her daughter was dying, but because the surgeon holding the scalpel was the same daughter she threw out in a snowstorm. Before I tell you how I decided who lives and who dies, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you have ever been the black sheep who came back as the wolf. I was sitting in my penthouse in downtown Atlanta, adjusting the strap of my vintage emerald gown. I was not scrubbing in for surgery that night. I was the guest of honor at the St. Jude Medical Center charity gala. My life was perfect. I had the career, the money, and the peace of mind that comes from total estrangement. Then my phone buzzed. It was the emergency line. The one that bypasses "Do Not Disturb." The voice on the other end was trembling. "Dr. Vance, we have a Jane Doe admission. ID matches your sister, Jasmine Vance. Massive organ failure. Family is on scene and they are hostile. Security is requesting backup." I did not feel panic. I felt a cold professional detachment. I grabbed my clutch and my keys to the Porsche. I did not drive to the hospital as a sister. I drove as the chief of trauma surgery. When I pulled up to the valet stand, I could already hear the screaming from inside the sliding glass doors. The ER is usually a symphony of controlled chaos. Beeping monitors, squeaking gurney wheels, the rhythmic commands of nurses. But tonight the noise was cutting through the order. It was the shrill voice of my mother, Vivian. I bypassed the main waiting room and took the private elevator up to the trauma floor. The doors opened and the smell hit me first. Antiseptic and fear. I walked down the corridor and the scene that unfolded was pathetic. My father Marcus was pacing back and forth in a suit that looked 10 years out of style. My mother was berating the head nurse, her face twisted in that familiar self-righteous rage I had grown up with. And there was Chad, my sister's husband. The man who claimed to be a tech entrepreneur but had never actually launched a product. He was wearing a tracksuit and pointing a finger in the face of a first-year resident. "Do you know who we are?" Chad screamed. "My wife has 200,000 followers. If you do not get a real doctor in here right now, I will sue this hospital into the ground. We do not want some affirmative action hire touching her. We want the chief." The resident looked like he was about to cry. He spotted me walking down the hall, and his eyes went wide with relief. But my family did not see a doctor. They saw a ghost. And then they saw a target. My mother spun around. Her eyes scanned my dress, the silk, the diamonds. But she did not register the success. She only saw the narrative she had invented 6 years ago. The lie that I had dropped out of medical school to clean toilets because I was too stupid to pass anatomy. Vivian marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. "Look who decided to show up," she spat. Her voice was loud enough to silence the entire nursing station. "Did you hear your sister was dying and come to scavenge her jewelry, Simone? Or are you just here to mop the floors?" I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch. I let her get close enough that I could smell her cheap perfume mixed with the stale scent of desperation. Chad laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "Look at her dress, Vivian. She probably stole it from one of her wealthy clients. Hey Simone, does your boss know you are parading around in her clothes? You need to leave. This is a family emergency, not a reunion for failures." My father finally looked up. He looked older, more tired. But his eyes held the same disappointment that had haunted my childhood. "You should not be here, Simone," he said quietly. "Go back to whatever life you are living. We are waiting for the chief of trauma. We need serious help, not your drama." I looked at the trauma bay behind them. I could see the monitors flashing red. Jasmine was crashing. Her vitals were tanking. The team inside was freezing, waiting for orders. They were waiting for me. I took a step forward and my mother snapped. She raised her hand. I saw the motion coming a mile away. It was the same hand that used to strike me when I got a B on a report card. The same hand that shoved me out the front door the night they disowned me. She swung hard, aiming for my face. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to put me back in my place as the scapegoat. But I am not that scared little girl anymore. I caught her wrist in midair. My grip was iron. I felt her bones shift under my fingers. The shock on her face was almost comical. She tried to pull back, but I held on. The entire ER was watching. The nurses, the patients, the security guards. "Let go of me, you ungrateful brat!" Vivian shrieked. "How dare you touch me?" I leaned in close. My voice was low, steady, dangerous. I did not shout. I did not cry. I spoke with the authority of someone who owns the building. "You are making a mistake, Vivian," I said. I released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling back into Chad. Before they could speak, I reached into my clutch. I pulled out my ID badge. The heavy plastic clicked as I clipped it onto the neckline of my designer gown. The bold black letters caught the fluorescent lights. Dr. Simone Vance, Chief of Trauma Surgery. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Chad squinted at the badge. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father cleaned his glasses as if his eyes were deceiving him. My mother just stared. Her face went pale. Her eyes darted from the badge to my face and back again. I turned to the head of security who was standing by the nurses' station. He straightened up and nodded at me. "Officer Williams," I said, my voice ringing clear through the hallway. "Remove these people from my sterile zone. They are harassing hospital staff and obstructing a life-saving procedure. If they resist, arrest them for trespassing." "But wait. Simone," my mother stammered, her voice trembling. "You are the chief." I ignored her. I turned my back on them and walked toward the trauma bay doors. As I pushed them open, I heard the security guards grabbing Chad and my mother. I heard them protesting, screaming my name, begging me to stop. But I did not look back. I had a patient to save, even if she was the sister who ruined my life. I stepped into the room and the air changed. The chaos vanished. My team looked at me, ready for command. "Dr. Vance," the resident said, "BP is 60/40. She is in hepatic failure. What are your orders?" I pulled on a pair of latex gloves. The snap of the rubber was the only sound in the room. "Intubate her," I said. "Get her stabilized, and get me a tox screen. I want to know exactly what my perfect sister has been putting into her body." The doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my family being dragged away. The surgery was about to begin, but the real operation was just starting. They thought they could cut me off. Now I was the only one holding the knife. They always called Jasmine their angel, the perfect daughter, the light of their lives. But angels do not need machines to clean their blood 24 hours a day. And angels definitely do not lie about being pregnant to hide a lethal addiction. I scrubbed my hands at the sink outside the trauma bay, watching the water turn pink as it washed away the soap. I took a deep breath, composing myself. Inside that room was not my sister. Inside that room was a patient, a 32-year-old female with multi-system organ failure. I had to separate the biology from the biography, or I would not be able to do my job. I pushed through the swinging doors, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. My family was huddled in the corner like wet dogs caught in a storm. My mother Vivian was clutching her rosary beads, muttering prayers that sounded more like demands. My father Marcus looked gray, his suit rumpled and stained with sweat. And Chad was pacing back and forth, scrolling frantically on his phone, probably deleting incriminating text messages or checking his non-existent bank account. I ignored them completely. I walked straight to the bedside. My movements were precise and calculated. I checked the pupil response. Sluggish. I checked the urine output bag. Empty. Dark brown. I adjusted the drip rate on the central line. The nurses moved around me like a well-oiled machine. We spoke a language my family did not understand, Hepatic encephalopathy, coagulopathy, INR levels rising. To my parents, it sounded like gibberish. To me, it sounded like a ticking clock counting down the minutes my sister had left. My mother could not stand the silence. She stepped forward, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and that arrogance she could never quite shake. "Well," she demanded. "What is taking so long? Why is she yellow, Simone? Why is her skin that color? Fix it. Give her something. She needs to be awake for her gender reveal party next week." I turned to face them slowly. I kept my face blank, void of any emotion. I was not their daughter in that moment. I was the chief of trauma. "Your daughter is in stage 4 liver failure," I said, my voice flat and clinical. "Her liver has essentially liquefied. She has acute necrosis. Her kidneys are shutting down, which is why she is not producing urine. She has maybe 48 hours without a transplant." The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. My mother let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure denial. "That is impossible," she screamed. "She is healthy. She is a fitness influencer. She drinks kale smoothies every morning. She promotes wellness products, and she is pregnant, for God's sake. You cannot transplant a liver into a pregnant woman. You are lying. You are just trying to scare us." I looked at my mother and I felt a wave of exhaustion. Even now, with her daughter dying, she was clinging to the image, the brand, the lie. I shook my head. "There is no baby Vivian. The ultrasound is empty. Her uterus is normal size. Her distended stomach is not a pregnancy bump. It is ascites, fluid buildup caused by organ failure." My father stepped in, his face red. "What do you mean, no baby? We saw the announcement. We saw the confetti." "She lied, Marcus," I said. "She lied to keep the engagement numbers up. She lied so you would keep sending her money for a nursery she was never going to build." My mother grabbed the bedrail, her knuckles turning white. "Number Jasmine would not lie. She is the honest one. You are the liar. You are the one who was kicked out of medical school for dealing drugs, remember? You are the failure." The accusation hung in the air like a foul smell. It triggered a memory so sharp it almost drew blood. The sterile cold of the hospital room suddenly felt like the freezing wind of that night 6 years ago. It was the winter of 2018. I was a second-year medical student at the top of my class. I had just finished my anatomy final and drove 4 hours home to surprise them for Christmas. I remembered the warmth I felt as I walked up the driveway of my childhood home, expecting the smell of cinnamon and pine. Instead, I found my suitcases on the front porch. They were covered in a thin layer of snow. I pounded on the door, my hands numb from the cold. My mother opened it, but she did not let me in. She stood in the doorway, blocking the heat from the house. She held up a piece of paper. It was a printout of an email. "We know what you did," she had hissed. "The dean emailed us. Selling prescription pills to undergraduates. Disgraceful. We will not harbor a criminal." I tried to explain. I tried to grab the paper to see it. I told them I was on the dean's list, not a watch list. But then I saw Jasmine. She was standing behind my mother, sipping hot cocoa wrapped in a cashmere blanket. She was smirking, a cold, calculated smile that told me everything I needed to know. Jasmine had forged the email. It was a clumsy forgery, but my parents wanted to believe it. Why did they want to believe their straight-A daughter was a criminal? Because they needed an excuse. They needed my tuition money. Chad had just pitched them a visionary idea for a social media app that never existed. They needed $200,000 for seed capital. My medical school fund. "Get off my property," my father had shouted from the hallway. "We have already transferred your fund to someone who will actually succeed. Someone with vision." They slammed the door in my face. I stood there shivering in the snow, listening to the lock click shut. I slept in my Honda Civic for 3 weeks, parked behind a 24-hour diner, while they invested my future in Chad's failure. That $200,000 evaporated in 6 months, spent on luxury vacations and leased cars, while I worked 3 jobs to pay my way back into school. I blinked the memory away, returning to the present. The anger I felt was not hot anymore. It was cold, hard, useful. I looked at Chad. He was sweating profusely now, avoiding my gaze. He knew I knew. She was not drinking kale smoothies, was she, Chad? I asked. He stammered. I don't know what she drinks. I am busy with work. You are unemployed, Chad, I snapped, and you knew exactly what she was taking. I looked back at my mother. Those smoothies were spiked with vodka. And not just alcohol. Her talk screen lit up like a Christmas tree. She has been taking high doses of dinitrophenol. My mother looked confused. Dini what? DNP, I clarified. It is an industrial chemical. It is used in explosives and dyes. It is also a banned black market weight loss drug. It burns fat by literally cooking your organs from the inside out. That is how she stayed so thin, Vivian. She was poisoning herself to maintain the image you love so much. And she was washing it down with a quart of vodka a day. My mother stepped between me and Chad, her denial turning into a fortress. Stop it, Simone. Stop making up lies. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of her, because she is beautiful and charismatic and people love her. And you. You are just a bitter, cold woman with no husband and no children. You are making this up to hurt us. You are lying about the pills. You are lying about the baby. You just want to punish us because we stopped paying for your school when you failed out. I looked at her, really looked at her. She truly believed her own delusion. She would rather believe I was a monster than admit her golden child was flawed. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not try to defend myself. I was done defending myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I walked over to the metal counter near the sink. I picked up the toxicology report. It was 5 pages long. Red flags and high alert markers covered every page. I walked back to my mother. She was trembling with rage, her face inches from mine. I raised the file and slapped it down onto the metal tray table next to Jasmine's bed. The sound rang out like a gunshot, startling the nurse in the corner. "Read it, Vivian," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "If you can read, it is all there. The amphetamines, the alcohol, the poison. Your golden child is rotting from the inside out. And you and Chad and Father, you are the ones who painted the gold plating on her while she crumbled underneath." My mother looked down at the papers. Her hands shook as she reached for them. She did not want to look, but she could not look away. The truth was black ink on white paper, and no amount of gaslighting could erase it. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a lung. My mother was still staring at the toxicology report, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She wanted to scream at me again. She wanted to slap me again. But the black ink on that white paper was a shield she could not break through. Her golden child was not a victim of bad luck. She was a victim of vanity and deception. But before Vivian could find a new way to blame me, the sliding glass door whooshed open. It was not a doctor. It was Mrs. Gable from hospital administration. She was a woman who had seen enough tragedy to be immune to tears. She held a clipboard against her chest like a weapon, and she did not look at the patient. She looked at the people standing around the bed. "Who is the primary policyholder for Jasmine Vance?" she asked, her tone clipped and efficient. Chad stepped forward, trying to regain some of the swagger he had lost moments ago. "That would be me," he said, puffing out his chest in his designer tracksuit. "I handle all the finances. Just put it on my tab." Mrs. Gable did not look impressed. She looked down at her tablet. "Mr. Vance, your insurance policy was terminated 6 months ago for non-payment. We have attempted to run the card on file a Platinum Amex, but it was declined. Code 51. Insufficient funds." The room seemed to shrink. My father, Marcus, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. His face was gray. "There must be a mistake," he said, his voice shaking. "My son-in-law is a tech entrepreneur. He founded Vancetagram. He has millions in venture capital." Mrs. Gable sighed. She had heard this story before. "Sir, I do not care about venture capital. I care about the bill. This requires a complex transplant surgery and extended ICU stay. Since there is no insurance, we require a deposit to proceed with pre-operative care. How much, my father asked. $450,000, payable immediately. My mother gasped. That is $500,000. We do not have that kind of cash lying around. Marcus, tell him to write the check. All eyes turned to Chad. The man who had sneered at me in the lobby. The man my parents had chosen over me. The man they gave my tuition money to so he could build his empire. Chad was sweating so hard his tracksuit was changing color. He laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. Well, you see, guys, he stammered, avoiding eye contact. My liquidity is a bit tied up right now. The market has been volatile, crypto is in a winter cycle. I cannot just liquidate my positions without taking a massive tax hit. It is complicated. You would not understand high-level finance. I let out a laugh. It was sharp and cold. High-level finance, I repeated. Is that what we are calling it now, Chad? I turned to my father. Marcus looked at me confused. What is he talking about, Simone? He is broke, father, I said calmly. He has been broke for 5 years. There is no app. There never was an app. The seed money you stole from me, the $200,000 you kicked me out of the house to give him, he spent it on leased cars, bottle service in Miami, and that fake Rolex on his wrist. Chad lunged toward me. Shut up, you jealous witch. Security, I said without raising my voice. The guard in the corner took a step forward, and Chad froze. I looked back at my parents. Jasmine knew. That is why she was starving herself and taking pills. She had to keep the influencer money coming in because her husband has been unemployed since 2019. She was the only one working. And now that she is dying, the gravy train has stopped. My father looked at Chad with a mixture of horror and realization. He grabbed Chad by the collar of his expensive jacket. Is it true? He shouted. Tell me she is lying. Tell me my daughter did not die for your lies. Chad pushed him away. Get off me, old man. It is not my fault your daughter has expensive taste. We needed to maintain an image. You were the ones who pushed us to look successful. My mother collapsed into the plastic chair next to the bed. Her world was crumbling. Her perfect daughter was a fraud. Her wealthy son-in-law was a bum, and they were facing a $500,000 bill they could not pay. Then I saw the shift. It happened in slow motion. My mother looked up from her hands. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. But this time she did not look at me with disgust. She looked at me with calculation. She looked at the Birkin bag sitting on the counter, the bag that cost more than her car. She looked at the red soles of my Louboutin heels. She looked at the diamonds in my ears. And finally she looked at the badge on my chest. Chief of Trauma Surgery. She realized something she should have realized the moment I walked in. I was the only person in this room with money. I was the only person who could make the problem go away. She stood up. She wiped her tears and smoothed down her dress. She put on a smile that was so fake it made my skin crawl. It was the smile she used for church elders and wealthy neighbors. Simone, baby, she said, her voice dripping with sudden sweetness. We are all upset. Emotions are high, but we are family, right? We help each other. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. 5 minutes ago I was a drug dealer and a failure. Now I was family. Mother, I said warningly, do not. She walked toward me, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back. Simone, look at you. She continued, ignoring my rejection. You have done so well for yourself. We always knew you were special. That is why we were so hard on you. To push you. And look, it worked. You are a chief. You are rich. You can help your sister. 450,000 is a lot for us, but for you, I am sure it is manageable. My father nodded, eager to jump on the bandwagon. Yes, Simone. Be the bigger person. Your sister is dying. You cannot put a price on life. God has blessed you, so you can bless others. Just write the check, honey. We will pay you back. I looked at them. I looked at the parents who left me to sleep in a car in the snow, who missed my graduation, who returned my wedding invitation, who called me a failure to my face until they needed my wallet. You want me to pay? I asked. Yes, my mother said, relieved. Just pay the deposit, for family. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My parents let out a sigh of relief. Chad smirked, thinking he had gotten away with it again. They thought I was opening my banking app. They thought I was transferring the funds. I dialed a number and put it on speakerphone. "Hello, this is legal," came the voice on the other end. "This is Dr. Vance," I said, holding the phone up so they could all hear. "I am with a patient in Trauma Bay 4. The family is unable to provide proof of payment or insurance." My mother's smile dropped. "What are you doing, Simone? Please prepare the discharge papers." I continued, my eyes locked on my mother's face. "And contact the county hospital for a transfer. If the deposit is not received within 60 minutes, initiate the transfer protocol. We are not a charity ward." I hung up the phone. The silence this time was terrified. "You cannot do that," my father whispered. "The county hospital is overcrowded. The care is— She will die if you move her." "Then you better find $450,000 in the next hour," I said. "Maybe you can sell the house." "Oh wait, you already refinanced the house to pay for Chad's gambling debts, didn't you?" My mother looked at me like I was the devil. "How can you be so cruel?" she hissed. "She is your sister." "And I am the daughter you threw away," I replied. "You taught me that money is more important than blood. I am just following your example." "TikTok, Vivian. You have 59 minutes." And then they brought God into it. As if God signs checks for them. As if the Almighty keeps a ledger of bank transfers next to the book of life. I sat back on my sofa, swirling the vintage Cabernet in my glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides like a memory you just cannot shake. You know, the exact moment when narcissists realize they have lost control. They do not apologize. They do not reflect. They do not ask for forgiveness. They pivot. They weaponize the one thing they think you still care about: your soul. My mother. Vivian did not have a credit card that worked, but she had a scripture for every occasion, especially the ones where she needed someone else to pay the bill. Back in the trauma room, the silence was broken by my mother's sigh. It was a theatrical sigh, the kind she used in the front row of Sunday service to let everyone know she was suffering for their sins. She walked over to the side of the bed where Jasmine lay unconscious and placed her hand on my sister's forehead. Then she looked at me with eyes that were suddenly wet with performative tears. "Simone, baby," she said, her voice trembling with a practiced vibrato. "I know we have had our differences. I know we have been hard on you. But the good book says to honor thy father and mother. It says that forgiveness is divine. Are you really going to let money stand between you and your salvation? Jasmine is your flesh and blood. Jesus would not turn his back on a leper, let alone a sister." My father Marcus nodded vigorously, clutching his Bible like a shield. "Yes, Simone. We raised you better than this. We took you to church every Sunday. We taught you charity. Where is your compassion? This is a test from the Lord and you are failing it. Do not let pride harden your heart." I looked at them standing there under the harsh fluorescent lights. The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. It tasted like ash. They were using the same religion they had used to justify kicking me out to now guilt me into saving them. They wanted me to be the sacrificial lamb again, but they forgot that I was the one holding the knife. I stepped closer to them, my heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. The sound was like a gavel hitting a bench. "You want to talk about honoring family, Vivian?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You want to quote scripture to me? Let us talk about the timeline of your compassion. Let us talk about May 15th, 2019. My mother blinked, confused by the specific date. "What about it?" "That was the day I graduated from medical school," I said. "I was the valedictorian. I gave the speech. I looked for you in the crowd. I saved 4 seats in the front row, right next to the dean. Empty. All 4 of them. You never showed up." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We were busy, Simone. We had obligations." "You were in Cabo," I corrected him. "I saw the photos on Facebook. Jasmine broke a nail and was feeling depressed, so you took her on a luxury retreat to cheer her up." You spent $3,000 on margaritas while I walked across that stage alone. I took another step forward. They shrank back. Let us talk about my wedding, I continued. I sent you an invite. A gold-embossed invitation to the Plaza Hotel. Do you remember what you sent back? You put it in a return envelope with a note written in red marker. It said, "Return to sender deceased." To you, I was already dead. You killed me off because I did not fit your narrative. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. And let us not forget the car accident on I-85. 3 years ago, I was T-boned by a drunk driver. I called you from the ambulance while I was bleeding from a head wound. I called the home phone. I called your cell. I called father. You sent me to voicemail. I found out later you were watching the season finale of The Bachelor and did not want to be disturbed. I leaned in close to my mother's face. So do not quote scripture to me, Vivian. Do not talk to me about what Jesus would do. You do not want forgiveness. You do not want redemption. You want financing. You want me to be the bank, so you can keep pretending you are the righteous ones. But the bank is closed. My mother's face twisted. The mask of piety slipped, and the ugly truth underneath peered out. She looked at me with pure hatred. You are a cold-hearted snake, she hissed. I should have left you at the orphanage. There it was, the truth. But before I could respond, Chad stepped forward. He had recovered from his earlier humiliation, and now he was holding his phone up like a weapon. The camera lens stared at me like a black eye. Fine, he spat. You want to play hardball, Dr. Vance? Let us see how your hospital likes this. He tapped the screen, and the recording light turned on. I am going live right now, he announced, his voice taking on that fake, enthusiastic tone of a social media influencer. I have 50,000 followers, Simone, and they love a good villain. I am going to tell them the chief of trauma is letting her own sister die because she is too cheap to pay a bill. I will show them your face. I will show them your designer dress. I will tell them you laughed while Jasmine crashed. You will be cancelled before morning. The medical board will strip your license when the mob comes for you. My father looked alarmed, but then he smirked, thinking this was checkmate. Go ahead, Chad. Show the world who she really is. I stood there watching the red dot on Chad's phone screen blinking. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought he could destroy my reputation with a 30-second video clip. He did not know that I operate in a world of facts, not feelings. And I had prepared for this moment before I even left my penthouse. I did not flinch. I did not reach for his phone. I did not call security. I simply reached into my lab coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Go ahead, Chad, I said, my voice steady and loud enough for his microphone to pick up. Press the live button, stream it to everyone. But while you are streaming, I will be uploading a little file of my own. Chad hesitated. His thumb hovered over the screen. What are you talking about? I hired a private investigator 3 hours ago, I said. When I saw Jasmine's name on the admission chart, I knew something did not add up. A healthy woman does not just drop dead of liver failure, so I had him run a full financial background check on you. Do you want to know what he found? Chad's hand started to shake. The camera wavered. You are bluffing, he said, but his voice cracked. Am I asked. I unfolded the paper. It was a bank statement. But not mine. Jasmine had a GoFundMe 2 years ago, right? I said, reading from the document. For her mysterious autoimmune illness. You raised $85,000 from sympathetic followers. People sent you their rent money. They sent you their savings because they loved her. My mother looked confused. Yes. That money went to specialists in Switzerland. Chad told us. I looked at Chad, who was now pale as a ghost. There were no specialists in Switzerland, Vivian, I said. I looked at the transaction history. DraftKings, BetMGM, FanDuel, the Bellagio in Las Vegas. I held the paper up so Chad could see the highlighted lines. You gambled it away, Chad. You took $85,000 of charity money meant for your sick wife, and you blew it on sports betting and poker. You drained her medical fund dry. That is why she had to take the cheap diet pills. That is why she could not afford a real doctor. You killed her financial safety net. I took a step toward him. That is wire fraud, Chad. That is charity fraud. That is grand larceny. And since you crossed state lines to place some of those bets, that is a federal crime. I have the FBI tip line on speed dial. Do you want me to press call or do you want to turn off that camera? Chad lowered the phone slowly. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a cornered rat. My father Marcus turned to look at him, his mouth agape. You told us the money was in a trust for her treatment, my father whispered. You told us the doctors required cash payments. Chad backed away toward the door. It was an investment strategy, he mumbled. I was trying to double it. I was trying to help. You monster, my mother screamed. She lunged at Chad, hitting his chest with her fists. You stole from my baby. You stole from us. I watched them turn on each other, the perfect family unit disintegrating in seconds over the weight of the truth. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. You have 30 minutes left, I said, cutting through their noise. The transfer ambulance is on its way. If that bill is not paid, Jasmine goes to the county ward. And Chad, if I see one post on social media mentioning my name, I hand this file to the district attorney. I turned and walked back to the nurses' station, leaving them to tear each other apart in the ruins of their own lies. But the biggest secret was still waiting to be revealed. The one that would explain why they really hated me. The one that was written in my DNA. The machinery of the hospital hummed around us, a constant reminder that life here was measured in volts and decibels. I watched the numbers on Jasmine's monitor dance a jagged rhythm. Her blood pressure was stabilizing, but the toxins in her blood were still rising, a silent tide drowning her from the inside. Then came the sound I had been dreading. A low guttural moan rose from the bed. Jasmine was waking up. Her eyelids fluttered open, but there was no recognition in them at first. Just panic. She tried to sit up, but the restraints in the tubes anchored her down. Her skin was a terrifying shade of yellow neon against the stark white sheets. The whites of her eyes were gone, replaced by the same sickly jaundice. She looked at her hands, which were swollen like latex gloves filled with water, and then she looked at me. Simone, she croaked, her voice sounding like grinding glass. It hurts. Make it stop. Why does it hurt so much? My mother rushed to the bedside, pushing past me. She grabbed Jasmine's hand, weeping openly now that the financial fraud had been momentarily eclipsed by the medical reality. Shh, baby, mommy is here, Vivian sobbed. You are going to be fine. We are fixing it. Simone is here. The doctors are here. Jasmine looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. Am I dying, Simone? Tell me the truth. Mom always lies, but you do not. Am I dying? I looked at my sister. For a second, I did not see the golden child who had tormented me or the influencer who had faked a pregnancy. I just saw a scared young woman who had destroyed her body for likes and validation. You are very sick, Jasmine, I said, keeping my voice level. Your liver has stopped working. We are doing everything we can to filter your blood, but the damage is severe. Before she could respond, the door opened again. This time, it was not a nurse or an administrator. It was Dr. Sterling, the head of the transplant unit. He was a tall man with gray hair and a face that never smiled. He walked in carrying a clipboard, and the gravity of his presence sucked the air out of the room. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He looked at the monitors, then at the family. We have a critical situation here, Dr. Sterling said, his voice deep and resonant. I have reviewed the toxicology reports and the imaging. Ms. Vance has acute fulminant hepatic failure. Her liver is necrotic. It is dead tissue. The dialysis machines are buying us hours, not days. My father Marcus stepped forward, wringing his hands. Okay, so put her on the list. Get her a new liver. Money is not an issue anymore, right, Simone? We can pay. Dr. Sterling shook his head slowly. It is not about money, Mr. Vance. It is about protocol. The National Transplant Waiting List is based on a scoring system called MELD. Your daughter's score is high enough to be at the top of the list, but there is a problem. The toxicology screen shows high levels of alcohol and illicit substances. He paused, letting the words sink in. Protocol dictates that patients must be 6 months sober to qualify for a cadaver liver from the National Registry, Dr. Sterling explained. We cannot give a scarce organ to a patient with active substance abuse issues. The ethics board will not approve it. She is ineligible for the list. My mother let out a scream that curdled the blood. You are sentencing her to death. You cannot do that. She is young. She has her whole life ahead of her. There is one other option, Dr. Sterling said, cutting through her hysteria. A living donor. The room went dead silent. The liver is the only organ that regenerates. Dr. Sterling continued looking around the room. If we can find a compatible donor who is willing to give us 60% of their liver, we can transplant it immediately. We bypass the national list. But we need a donor with the same blood type and excellent physical health. And we need them right now. Hope flared in my mother's eyes. A desperate, frantic hope. Me, she said, pounding her chest. Take mine. I am her mother. I gave her life. Take whatever you need. Dr. Sterling looked at her chart, which he was holding. Mrs. Vance, I see here you are 62 years old and you have type 2 diabetes and a history of heart arrhythmia. Is that correct? Yes. But I am fine, Vivian insisted. I manage it. I am sorry, Dr. Sterling said firmly. The surgery to remove part of a liver is major. The mortality risk for the donor is real. With your age and diabetic condition, you would not survive the procedure. We cannot kill one person to save another. You are not a candidate. Vivian collapsed back into the chair, sobbing into her hands. What about you, sir? Dr. Sterling turned to my father. Marcus looked down at his shoes. I have high blood pressure, he mumbled. And I had that mini stroke last year. I take blood thinners. Dr. Sterling marked something on his clipboard. Disqualified. You would bleed out on the table. Then the doctor turned to Chad. The room's attention shifted to the man in the tracksuit. He was young. He was technically family. Mr. Vance, you are the husband, Dr. Sterling said. You are young. You appear healthy. We would need to run a blood type match, but if you are compatible, you could save your wife. Chad's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. He backed away until he hit the wall. The color drained from his face, leaving him pasty and sweating. I cannot, he stammered. What do you mean you cannot? My father roared. She is your wife. You spent her money, now save her life. I have a condition. Chad lied, his voice cracking. I faint when I see blood. I have a phobia. A severe phobia. I cannot go under the knife. What if something goes wrong? I need to be here to run the business. I mean, manage things. I cannot be laid up in a hospital bed for months recovery. You coward, my mother hissed. You spineless little parasite. You will not do it because you are afraid of a scar. I am not a match, Chad yelled, desperate to get the heat off him. I am B negative. She is O positive. I know it. We checked when we did the blood work for the marriage license. I cannot give to her. Dr. Sterling sighed, checking his watch. If that is true, then you are out. O positive patients can only receive from O donors. Then the silence returned. But this time it was different. It was heavy, pregnant with expectation. Slowly, inevitably, 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I was standing near the door, my arms crossed over my chest. I was 32. I ran 5 miles every morning. I had never smoked. I barely drank. And I was O positive. They knew it. I knew it. Dr. Sterling looked at me too. Dr. Vance, he said softly, speaking to me as a colleague now. You are a match. I recall your employee health file. You are the ideal candidate. I stared back at him. I knew the medicine. I knew I could survive the surgery. I also knew it would mean 6 weeks of pain, a massive scar across my abdomen, and risking my own career as a surgeon if I had complications. My mother stood up slowly. She walked toward me. Her face was a mask of tragic pleading. The anger from before was gone, replaced by a mother's desperate bargaining. Simone, she whispered. Look at your sister. I looked. Jasmine was conscious again, watching us. Tears were streaming down her yellow cheeks. Help me, Simone, she mouthed silently. Vivian dropped to her knees. Right there on the dirty hospital floor in her Sunday dress, she knelt before me. She wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face in the fabric of my gown. Please, Simone, she wept. I am begging you. I know we have been terrible. I know we failed you. I know Chad is a monster. But Jasmine is innocent. She is your baby sister. You used to braid her hair. You used to read her stories. Do not let her die. I stood rigid, feeling her tears soak through my dress. It was a scene straight out of a melodrama, but I felt nothing but a cold, hollow ache in my chest. Mommy loves you, Simone Vivian cried, looking up at me. I know I have not shown it, but I do. You are my daughter. You came from my body. We share the same blood. You cannot let your own blood die. You owe me this. I gave you life. Now I am asking you to give life back to this family. Just a piece of you. That is all I ask. My father joined in, standing behind her. Simone, please. This wipes the slate clean. You save her and everything is forgiven. We will start over. We will be a real family again. I looked down at the woman clutching my legs. I looked at the man bargaining with my future. They were using the oldest guilt trip in the book. Blood. Biology. The debt of birth. They thought that because they created me, they owned me. They thought that my organs were spare parts for their favorite child. They thought that the bond of DNA was a chain I could never break. But they were operating on incomplete information. I reached down and peeled my mother's fingers off my dress one by one. I did not do it gently. I did it with the force of a surgeon separating tissue. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us. Get up, Vivian, I said, my voice ice cold. You are embarrassing yourself. She stayed on the floor, looking up at me with confusion and hurt. You are saying no. You are going to let her die. I looked at Dr. Sterling. Doctor, give us the room, please. I need 5 minutes with the family before I make my decision. Dr. Sterling nodded, sensing the volatility of the situation, and stepped out, closing the door behind him. I turned back to my parents. My mother was scrambling to her feet, wiping her face. You are going to do it right, Simone? She asked, her voice shaking. You are going to save her. I walked over to my purse. I did not reach for my phone this time. I reached for the blue folder I had carried with me for 6 years. The folder I had received the week after they kicked me out into the snow. You keep talking about blood, Vivian, I said, unzipping the folder. You keep talking about how I owe you because I came from your body. You keep saying that family is defined by DNA. I pulled out the document. It was a genetic testing report stamped with the logo of a national ancestry lab. You are right about one thing, I said, turning to face them. We need to have a conversation about bloodlines, but not for the reason you think. I am not going to give her my liver. And the reason isn't because I hate her. I tossed the folder onto the bed right next to Jasmine's legs. It is because, biologically speaking, I am not her sister. And Vivian, you are not my mother. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was the sound of a bomb detonating in a vacuum. My father's jaw dropped. My mother stopped breathing. And for the first time that night, I smiled. It was time to cut the cord for good. The truth cuts deeper than any scalpel. A surgeon knows that once you make an incision, there is no going back. You have to finish what you started. I sat in my living room, swirling the last drops of wine in my glass, staring into the camera lens. I needed you to understand that I did not pull that blue folder out of my purse to hurt them. I pulled it out to free myself. For 30 years, I thought I was the black sheep because I was unlovable. It turns out I was the black sheep because I was the only one who didn't belong in the flock. Back in the hospital room, the air had been sucked out of the space. My mother Vivian was staring at the blue folder lying on the bed next to Jasmine's legs. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Not the ghost of a person, but the ghost of her own deception coming back to haunt her. "You are talking nonsense, Simone," she stammered. "The stress has gotten to you. You are delusional. Of course I am your mother. I gave birth to you in a hospital in Chicago. I have the birth certificate." I laughed. It was a hollow sound that bounced off the sterile walls. "Paperwork can be forged, Vivian," I said. "Biology cannot." I picked up the folder and opened it to the first page. It was a summary of genetic markers. I held it up so my father Marcus could see it. He was standing by the window looking confusion and angry. "6 years ago, when you kicked me out into the snow, I had nothing," I said, my voice steady. "I was sleeping in my car. I was eating out of vending machines. I got sick. Really sick. I went to a free clinic and the doctor asked for my family medical history. He asked about heart disease. He asked about cancer. I realized I didn't know. Because you never talked about it. So I scraped together $90 and I took a DNA test. Not just one. I took 3. I turned the page. Here is the result, Marcus. Read it. Probability of paternity between Marcus Vance and Simone Vance. 0%. My father's face went slack. He took a step forward, snatching the paper from my hand. He scanned the lines, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "This is a mistake," he muttered. "This has to be a mistake. Vivian told me." He stopped. He looked at his wife. Vivian was now pale, sweating profusely. She looked like a cornered animal. "Don't listen to her, Marcus," she screeched. "She typed that up on her computer. She is trying to tear this family apart." I ignored her. I turned to the next page. "And here is the maternal match," I continued. "Probability of maternity between Vivian Vance and Simone Vance. 25%. Do you know what 25% means in genetics? It means we are related, but you are not my mother. You are my aunt." The room was spinning for them, but for me it was perfectly still. I had lived with this truth for 6 years. I had made peace with it. They were just beginning to feel the impact. I walked over to the window and looked at my reflection in the glass. "I always wondered why I didn't look like you," I said. "Jasmine has your nose, Vivian. She has father's chin. I have nothing." I looked at old photo albums. There are no pictures of you pregnant with me. There are hundreds of Jasmine. But me, I just appeared one day. I turned back to face them. "I am Clara's daughter, aren't I?" The name hit my mother like a physical blow. She grabbed the bed rail to steady herself. Clara was her younger sister. The beautiful one. The wild one. The one who died in a car crash on New Year's Eve 30 years ago. "You shut your mouth," Vivian hissed. "Do not speak her name." "She was my mother," I said. "She died when I was 2, and you took me in." "But you didn't adopt me out of love, did you? You didn't want a second child. You certainly didn't want Clara's child." I looked at Marcus. He was trembling. The paper was shaking in his hands. He looked from me to his wife, and for the first time in my life I saw the realization dawn on him. "Marcus didn't know," I said softly. I looked at the man I had called father my whole life, the man who had been cold to me, who had been distant, who had always looked at me with a mix of resentment and shame. "You lied to him too, didn't you, Vivian?" Marcus looked up at his wife. His voice was a whisper, a broken sound. "Vivian," he said, "you told me, that night in Chicago. You told me she was mine. You told me she was the result of that mistake I made. You told me she was my sin." My jaw tightened. So that was it. That was the lie. Vivian had convinced her husband that I was his illegitimate child from an affair. She told him I was his bastard daughter that he had to raise out of guilt. That explained everything. That explained why he never hugged me. That explained why he always looked at me like I was a burden. He thought I was the living proof of his infidelity. He thought I was the reason his marriage was imperfect. "You let him believe I was a product of cheating," I said, my voice rising. You let me grow up in a house where my own father resented me because he thought I was a mistake. But I wasn't his mistake. I was your sister's orphan. Marcus dropped the paper. He looked at Vivian with horror. I raised her because I thought I owed you, he shouted. I paid for everything. I put a roof over her head because I thought I had sinned. I spent 30 years feeling guilty every time I looked at her face, and she isn't even mine. Vivian was crying now, but they were crocodile tears. She was sobbing about protecting the family reputation, about how Clara was a drug addict, and she was trying to save me from the stigma. I saved you, she wailed, pointing at me. Clara was a mess. She was a junkie. I took you in. I gave you a good Christian home. I gave you a father. Who cares about the biology? I raised you. You didn't raise me. I cut her off. You tolerated me. You used me as a punching bag for your husband's guilt. You made me the scapegoat while you worshipped Jasmine, and the only reason you kept me around wasn't charity. It wasn't love. I stepped closer to the bed where Jasmine lay. Even in her drug-induced haze, my sister looked shocked. She had grown up believing the same lie. She thought she was the legitimate child, and I was the half-sister born of sin. You kept me because of the will, I said. The word hung in the air. Clara didn't die broke, did she? I asked. She wasn't just a junkie. She was an artist, a successful one, and she had a life insurance policy. A big one. Vivian's eyes went wide. She stopped crying instantly. I know about the trust fund, Vivian, I said. I know about the money she left for me. The money you were supposed to give me when I turned 25. Marcus looked at his wife again. What trust fund, he asked. You told me Clara died penniless. You told me we had to pay for her funeral. Vivian didn't answer. She couldn't. The web of lies was too tangled, and she was caught in the center of it. I leaned over the bed and picked up the blue folder. I closed it with a snap. So, no, Vivian. I will not give Jasmine my liver. Because we are not sisters, we are cousins, and frankly I don't give organs to strangers who steal my inheritance. I turned to Marcus. He looked broken, a man who realized his entire life had been manipulated by the woman standing next to him. I am sorry, Marcus, I said. I am sorry she used me to punish you for 30 years. But that is not my burden to carry anymore. You aren't my father. And thank God for that. Because I would hate to share DNA with a man who let his wife treat a child like garbage. I walked toward the door. You have a lot to talk about, I said. But do it quickly. The transfer ambulance is 5 minutes away. And Vivian, if I were you, I would call a lawyer. Not for the medical bill, but for the embezzlement charges I am about to file. I walked out into the hallway, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel heavy. I felt weightless. I had severed the limb that was rotting, but the surgery wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of $3 million. They say that money is the root of all evil, but in my family, money was the root of their lifestyle. For years I asked myself why they hated me so much. Why was I the scapegoat? Why was I the one who had to sleep in the attic room while Jasmine got the master suite? I used to think it was just cruelty. I used to think it was just because I reminded them of a sister they wanted to forget. But I was wrong. It was not about hate. It was about math. It was a cold, hard calculation made by a woman who loved designer handbags more than she loved her own integrity. I did not leave the hospital immediately after dropping the DNA bomb. I stood in the corridor watching through the glass window as my family imploded. My father was shouting, my mother was weeping. But I knew they were not done. Vivian came rushing out into the hallway, her face a mask of panicked fury. She was not running after me to apologize. She was running after me to silence me. You cannot leave, she screamed, grabbing my arm. You cannot just drop a bomb like that and walk away. You are confused, Simone. You do not understand how complicated it was. Clara was unstable. I did everything to protect you. I looked at her hand on my arm. The diamond bracelet she was wearing caught the light. It was a Cartier love bracelet. $6,000. I wondered which month of my tuition that bracelet had cost. I removed her hand gently but firmly. I understand perfectly, Vivian, I said. I understand that you lied about my parentage. But that was just the cover story, wasn't it? The real lie was never about who gave birth to me. It was about what she left behind. Vivian froze. Her eyes darted left and right, checking if anyone was listening. "I do not know what you are talking about," she whispered. I opened the blue folder again. I flipped past the DNA results to the back section. These were the documents that my forensic accountant had dug up. They were harder to find because Vivian had been careful. But she had not been careful enough. Clara did not just leave a baby, I said, my voice projecting clearly so my father, who had stepped into the hallway, could hear. She left a policy, a life insurance policy, and a copyright portfolio for her artwork. When she died, all of that was liquidated and put into a irrevocable trust. I pulled out a document titled the Clara Vance Memorial Trust. $3 million, Vivian, I said, reading the figure. $3 million deposited in 1996. Beneficiary Simone Vance. Trustee Vivian Vance. My father Marcus looked like he had been slapped. $3 million, he repeated. You told me she left nothing. You told me we had to take out a second mortgage to pay for her braces. Vivian turned on him, desperate. I had to manage it, Marcus. Raising a child is expensive. The legal fees, the taxes. You do not understand. I laughed. It was a bitter sound. The terms of the trust were simple, I said. The money was supposed to be invested conservatively. I was supposed to receive full access to the principal when I turned 25. I looked at Vivian. 25. Does that age ring a bell? She said nothing. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. You kicked me out when I was 23, I continued. 2 years before the trust matured. At the time I thought you were just being cruel. I thought you were punishing me for the fake drug scandal. But that was not. It was it. You needed me gone. You needed me estranged. You needed me homeless and desperate, so that when the bank sent the notification letters for my 25th birthday, I would not be there to receive them. I pulled out a stack of bank statements. These were the smoking guns. You intercepted the mail, I said, flipping through the pages. You told the bank I was mentally incapacitated. You told them I was in a facility. And then you started draining the account. I held up a page covered in highlighted transactions. Look at the dates, Marcus, I said, showing the paper to my father. Here is a withdrawal for $50,000 on June 3, 2019. That was the week Jasmine got her new Mercedes. I flipped the page. Here is a withdrawal for $100,000 on August 10th. That was the down payment on the vacation home in Aspen. I flipped again. And here is the big one. $200,000 transferred to Vance Tagram LLC. That was the seed money for Chad. You did not give him your savings, Marcus. You gave him my inheritance. Marcus took the papers. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped them. He looked at the transactions. He looked at the dates. And then he looked at the signature at the bottom of the authorized line. It was my name, Simone Vance. But the handwriting was loopy and slanted. You forged her signature, he whispered, looking at his wife. Vivian tried to snatch the papers back, but he pulled away. I had to, she cried. We needed the money, Marcus. Your pension was not enough. We had a lifestyle to maintain. We had appearances to keep up. And Simone didn't need it. She was smart. She could work. Jasmine needed help. Jasmine is not like her. Jasmine needs support. So you stole from an orphan to spoil a brat, I said. I stepped closer to Vivian. You systematically drained $3 million over the last 6 years. You bought clothes. You bought cars. You paid for Jasmine's plastic surgery. You paid for Chad's gambling debts. You ate my future. You wore my future on your wrist and drove it around town while I was working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria to pay for textbooks. Vivian straightened up, trying to regain some shred of dignity. I used it for the family, she said, her voice hard. And you are family. So technically it was used for you, too. We put a roof over your head for 20 years. We fed you. We clothed you. That money was reimbursement for the burden of raising you. The burden, I repeated, the burden of raising a child who came with a $3 million paycheck. You were paid $150,000 a year in trustee fees alone, Vivian. I saw that in the ledger, too. You were paid to be my mother, and you still stole the rest. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the forged signature. He looked sick. I did not know he said. His voice was barely a whisper. I swear to God, Simone, I did not know. I thought she had family money. I thought she was investing well. I never asked. Ignorance is not a defense, Marcus, I said. You enjoyed the vacations. You drove the car. You lived in the house that my mother's death paid for. You are just as guilty. I took the papers back from him and slid them into the blue folder. This is why I am not paying for the liver transplant, I said. This is why I am not writing a check for $400,000. Because I have already paid. I have paid $3 million to this family. I think that covers my debt. Vivian glared at me, hatred radiating from her eyes. You are going to send your sister to the county morgue over money, she spat. You are cold. You are heartless. No, Vivian, I said. I am just insolvent. Because you bankrupted me before I even had a chance to start. I checked my watch. My lawyer has already filed the paperwork, I said. We are freezing your assets, Vivian. The house, the cars, the accounts. Everything you bought with my trust fund is now evidence. You will not be able to sell a single piece of jewelry to pay for Jasmine's surgery. You are broke, truly broke. For the first time in your life, you are going to know what it feels like to have nothing. Vivian lunged at me. She actually tried to attack me right there in the hallway. Her fingers curled into claws reaching for my face. You ungrateful witch, she screamed. Give me those papers. But she never reached me. 2 hospital security guards who had been watching the altercation stepped in. They grabbed her arms, pulling her back. Let me go, she shrieked, kicking and thrashing. That is my daughter. She is stealing from me. I watched them restrain her. I watched the woman who had terrified me as a child get dragged away like a common criminal. She looked small. She looked pathetic. She looked like exactly what she was. A thief in a Sunday dress. I turned to my father. He was leaning against the wall, looking old and defeated. You should go be with Jasmine, I said. She is going to wake up soon. And she is going to realize that her mother cannot buy her way out of this one. Marcus looked at me. There were tears in his eyes, real tears this time. I am sorry, he whispered. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just the clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out dead tissue. Do not apologize to me, Marcus, I said. Apologize to the girl you left in the snow. She is the one who needed you. I do not need anything from you anymore. I turned and walked down the long white corridor. The sound of my heels on the floor was the only rhythm I needed. I had exposed the infection. I had drained the abscess. But the surgery was not over. I still had to save the patient. Not because I loved her, but because, unlike them, I took an oath to do no harm. And I was going to keep it. The sound of my mother's screaming echoed through the sterilized hallway like a siren alerting everyone to her guilt. She was not screaming for forgiveness. She was not screaming for mercy. She was screaming because for the first time in her life her narrative was not just cracking, it was shattering. You are a liar. Vivian shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of pure ugliness. I did not steal anything. I managed it. I invested it. I kept this family afloat while you were off playing doctor. Do you think this lifestyle is free? Do you think the country club memberships and the cars and the vacations just pay for themselves? I did what I had to do. I did it for us. She turned to my father looking for an ally, looking for the man she had manipulated for 3 decades. Tell her, Marcus. Tell her how hard I worked to keep up appearances. Tell her we deserved that money. But Marcus Vance was not looking at her. He was looking at the floor. He was looking at the expensive Italian loafers on his feet and realizing they were paid for with money stolen from a dead woman's child. He was realizing that every time he had looked at me with disdain, thinking I was the proof of his infidelity, he was actually looking at the victim of his wife's greed. The hallway was filling with spectators. Nurses stopped charting. Visitors paused mid-step. My family had always loved an audience, but this was not the kind of attention they craved. This was the kind of attention that ends careers and ruins reputations. Marcus slowly raised his head. His eyes were red not from sadness, but from a rage so deep it looked like madness. He had prided himself on being a pillar of the community, a deacon in the church, a man of honor. And now he stood exposed as a fool and a thief. "You told me she was mine," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "You let me treat her like a bastard for 30 years. You let me sleep at night thinking I had sinned when the only sinner in the bed was you." Vivian grabbed his lapels, shaking him. "It does not matter, Marcus. We are a team. We have to stick together. She is trying to destroy us. She is trying to take the house." I watched as the realization finally hit him. It was not about me. It was never about me. It was about his ego. It was about the fact that he had been played. "Get your hands off me!" Marcus roared. And then it happened. The man who cared more about what the neighbors thought than what his children felt lost control. He pulled his arm back and slapped Vivian across the face. The sound was sickeningly loud. A sharp crack of flesh against flesh that silenced the entire corridor. Vivian stumbled back, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. She had spent a lifetime controlling him, and in 1 second the leash had snapped. "You are a fraud," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "You made me a thief. You made me an accomplice. Do you know what the guys at the lodge will say? Do you know what the pastor will say? You have ruined me." He did not care that he had ruined my childhood. He only cared that she had ruined his image. But I did not interrupt. I just stood there leaning against the nurse's station, watching them tear each other apart. It was like watching rats fight on a sinking ship. Vivian looked at him, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. "Marcus, please. I did it for Jasmine. I did it so she could have the best." And that is when the third rat decided to jump ship. Chad had been standing near the wall watching the exchange with wide eyes. He had heard every word. He had heard about the trust fund. He had heard the number $3 million. And he had heard that Vivian was now powerless. I saw the gears turning in his head. He looked at Vivian, who was sobbing. He looked at Marcus, who was hyperventilating. And then he looked at me. He looked at my designer dress. He looked at the calm authority in my posture. And most importantly, he looked at the invisible dollar signs floating above my head. Chad straightened his tracksuit jacket and walked over to me. He stepped over Vivian, who was still on the floor, without even glancing down. He put on that charming smile, the one he used to scam investors and naive women. "Simone," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound seductive. "Listen. I think things got a little heated earlier. I want you to know I had no idea about any of this." I raised an eyebrow. "You had no idea, Chad? You spent 200 grand of my money on a fake startup." He waved his hand dismissively. "That was Vivian's idea. She told me it was a gift. She told me you wanted to support the family. If I had known she stole it from you, I never would have touched it. You know me, Simone. I am an honest guy." I almost laughed out loud. The audacity was impressive in a sociopathic kind of way. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "Look, Jasmine is... well, she is a mess. You were right about her. She is unstable. She lied to me too. The pregnancy. The pills. I have been trying to leave her for months, but she threatened to kill herself. I feel like a hostage in this marriage." He was rewriting history in real time. 5 minutes ago, he was her devoted husband. Now he was a victim. "I have always admired you, Simone." Chad continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are the smart one. You are the successful one. You are the one with the class. I think we have a lot in common. Maybe after this is all over, you and I could grab a drink, discuss how to handle the legal stuff. I could help you testify against them." I stared at him. He was offering to trade his dying wife for a chance at my bank account. He was willing to sell out the woman who had funded his entire lifestyle just to attach himself to a new host. I looked down at his shoes. Cheap knockoffs. Just like him. Chad, I said, my voice flat, you are not just a liar, you are a parasite. But you are a bad parasite because you kill the host before you find a new one. His smile faltered. Come on, Simone, do not be like that. We are the victims here. I am the victim. I corrected him. You are just the accessory. I looked past him toward the elevator doors at the end of the hall. They were sliding open. 4 men in dark suits stepped out. They were not doctors. They moved with a purpose that made the air in the hallway turn frigid. I checked my watch. Right on time. Who are your friends? Chad asked, looking nervous. They are not my friends, I said, pushing off the counter. But they are definitely going to be yours. The men walked straight toward us. The lead officer held up a badge that gleamed under the hospital lights. It was not hospital security. It was the Economic Crimes Division. Vivian Vance, he announced, his voice booming. My mother looked up from the floor, mascara running down her face like war paint. Yes, she whispered. Mrs. Vance. I am Detective Miller with the State Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant for your arrest for embezzlement fraud and identity theft. Vivian let out a wail that sounded like an animal caught in a trap. Marcus backed away from her as if she were contagious. And Marcus Vance, the detective, continued, turning to my father. Me? Marcus stammered. I did not do anything. I did not know. We have your signature on several loan documents securing assets purchased with stolen funds, the detective said. You are coming with us for questioning. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes. Simone, tell them. Tell them I did not know. I said nothing. I just took a sip of water from the cup I had placed on the counter. And Chad Reynolds, the detective said, turning to the man in the tracksuit. Chad put his hands up, backing away. Whoa, hold on. I am just the son-in-law. I am not involved in their mess. We have a separate warrant for you, son, the detective said, pulling out a second pair of handcuffs. Wire fraud, internet gambling across state lines, and filing false tax returns for a non-existent business. Chad's face went white. But I can explain. You can explain it to the judge, the detective said. Cuff them. I watched as the officers moved in. It was a beautiful choreography of justice. Vivian was hauled to her feet, screaming about her rights. Marcus was slumped against the wall, weeping into his hands as the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. Chad was trying to run, but a younger officer tackled him against the vending machine. The hallway was chaos, but inside my head, it was quiet. I watched my mother being led away. She looked back at me one last time. Simone, help me, she screamed. I am your mother. I looked her dead in the eye. No, Vivian, I said softly. You are just the trustee, and your term has expired. As they dragged them into the elevator, leaving me alone in the hallway, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't happiness. It was relief. The cancer had been cut out. The toxins had been flushed. But the patient was still in the room behind me. Jasmine. The sister who was not my sister. The girl who had bullied me. The girl who was dying. The police had taken the criminals, but they had left the tragedy. I turned around and looked at the closed door of the trauma bay. The doctors were still in there. The machines were still beeping. My family was gone. My money was gone. But I was still a surgeon, and I had a job to do. I walked toward the door, pushing up my sleeves. The revenge was over. Now the real work began. I had destroyed their lives. Now I had to decide if I was going to save hers. The hallway was quiet now. The police had taken my parents and Chad away, leaving only the echoing silence of their ruin. I stood alone under the fluorescent lights, watching the elevator numbers descend. Ground floor, police cruiser, booking station, jail cell. They were gone. But the monitors inside Trauma Bay 4 were still screaming. I walked back into the living room of my mind, swirling the wine in my glass as I looked at you. They expected me to walk away. They expected me to let gravity take its course. After all, they had stolen my inheritance, lying about my birth, and treated me like a parasite for 30 years. Revenge is sweet, but letting nature take its revenge is even sweeter. But here is the thing about being a surgeon. You do not get to choose who deserves to live. You only get to choose how hard you fight to keep them from dying. I am not a daughter seeking validation anymore. I am a doctor who took an oath, and in my operating room, even monsters get equal care. I pushed open the doors to the trauma bay. The scene was deteriorating fast. Jasmine was seizing. Her body arched off the bed, the violence of the convulsions shaking the heavy equipment. The nurse was shouting out vitals that were incompatible with life. BP is 60/30, heart rate 140. She is coding. We are losing her. Dr. Sterling looked up at me. He looked relieved to see me but also hesitant. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice tight. You should not be in here. You are too close. The conflict of interest is off the charts. We can page the on-call attending. I looked at the monitor. The line was jagged and failing. There is no time for the on-call attending, I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a blade. She has minutes. Her abdomen is rigid. The ascites fluid is compressing her vena cava. She is not dying from the liver failure right now. She is dying from abdominal compartment syndrome. She needs immediate decompression and a transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt. Sterling stared at me. That is a high-risk procedure, Simone. If she bleeds out on the table, then she bleeds out, I interrupted. But if we do nothing, she is dead in 5 minutes. Are you going to argue ethics or are you going to help me scrub in? Sterling nodded. Get her to OR2. Move. I did not run. I walked with purpose. I entered the scrub room and turned on the water. It was hot, scalding hot. I plunged my hands under the stream, grabbing the stiff brush. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw. Every stroke of the brush felt like I was scrubbing away the last hour. I washed away the image of my mother in handcuffs. I washed away the look on my father's face when he realized he was a cuckold. I washed away Chad's pathetic begging. When I looked in the mirror above the sink, I did not see the rejected sister. I saw Dr. Vance, the woman who had built a career on saving people who had been broken by the world. I stepped into the operating room backwards, hands held high. The nurse tied my gown. I snapped on my gloves. The latex felt like a second skin, a layer of protection between me and the toxicity of my family. The anesthesiologist looked at me over the drape. She is under Dr. Vance, but her clotting factors are non-existent. She is going to bleed. Hang 2 units of O negative, I ordered. Start the pressors. 10 blade. The scrub nurse slapped the scalpel into my hand. It was cold, heavy, familiar. I looked down at the field of blue drapes. The only thing visible was a square of yellowed iodine-stained skin. It was Jasmine's abdomen, but to me, it was just anatomy. It was just a problem to be solved. Scalpel, I whispered. I made the incision. A long, vertical line down the midline. There was no hesitation, no tremor in my hand. The blood welled up instantly, dark and angry, but I was faster. Suction. Bovie. The smell of cauterized flesh filled the room. It was a smell most people would find repulsing, but to me it smelled like control. I was opening the Pandora's box that was my sister's body. When I entered the abdominal cavity, the pressure released with a wet sound. Liters of toxic fluid poured out, filling the suction canisters. It was the physical manifestation of all the lies she had swallowed. The poisonous diet pills, the vodka, the stress of maintaining a fake life. It was all draining out now. I saw the liver. It was shrunken, nodular, black in places. It looked like a piece of coal. It was hard to believe that this organ belonged to the girl who posted glowing photos of her healthy lifestyle online. This was the reality. Ugly, necrotic, dying. She is dropping, Dr. Sterling warned, watching the monitor. Pressure is 50/20. She is dry, I said, working faster. More fluids. Clamp. My hands moved instinctively. I found the portal vein. I inserted the shunt. I was rerouting the blood flow, bypassing the dead liver, trying to buy her time. It was not a cure. It was a patch. I was building a bridge to nowhere, hoping that maybe, just maybe, a donor organ would appear in a week. But for tonight, I just had to keep her heart beating. Damn it, she is bleeding from the retroperitoneal space, Sterling shouted. I reached in blindly. My fingers found the source. A tear in a vessel weakened by the toxins. I pinched it shut. I can feel the pulse, I said, closing my eyes to focus on the sensation against my gloved fingertip. It is thready, weak, but it is there. Suture. 4-0 proline. I stitched the vessel. Loop, knot, cut, loop, knot, cut. It was a rhythm, a dance. I was sewing her life back together, one stitch at a time. The same sister who had tried to tear my life apart. The irony was not lost on me, but I pushed it aside. The monitor beeped faster, higher, stronger. BP is stabilizing, the anesthesiologist announced, sounding surprised. 90/60. I exhaled. I had not realized I was holding my breath. Let us place the drains and close, I said. Leave the fascia open. We will do a vacuum dressing. She needs to decompress. The closing was routine. Staple, tape, clean. I stepped back from the table. My gown was splattered with blood, my sister's blood, the blood that my mother had begged me to honor, the blood that was chemically toxic but biologically foreign to me. I pulled down my mask. The air in the room felt cold against my sweaty face. Good save, Dr. Vance, Sterling said, nodding at me with respect. That was impressive, given the circumstances. I looked at Jasmine's face peeking out from under the drapes. She looked small, frail. The tube in her throat was breathing for her. She was alive. She would wake up in the ICU alone. Her husband was in jail. Her mother was in jail. Her father was in police custody. And the sister she had tormented was the only reason she was not in a body bag. Get her to the ICU, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Start her on continuous dialysis, and keep her sedated. She is not going to like her new reality when she wakes up. I stripped off my gloves and tossed them into the biohazard bin. They landed with a wet thud. I walked out of the OR and into the scrub room. I leaned against the sink for a moment, watching the water swirl down the drain. I had saved her. I had done my job. I had honored the oath. But as I looked at my reflection, I knew one thing for sure. I had saved her life, but I had not saved her future. That was something she would have to face on her own. And the bill for tonight's surgery was just the first installment of the debt she now owed the universe. I dried my hands and walked out to meet the dawn. The sun was coming up over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the parking lot where my Porsche was waiting. I was exhausted. I was alone. But for the first time in 32 years, I was free. And I still had a lawsuit to file. The operating room doors swung shut behind me with a heavy finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. The air in the scrub room was frigid, but I was burning up from the inside. I had just spent 4 hours with my hands inside the woman who had made my childhood a living hell. I had stitched her veins. I had filtered her blood. I had saved her life. But as I walked down the sterile white corridor toward the waiting area, I knew that saving a life is not the same thing as saving a soul. Jasmine was alive, but the sister they worshipped, the golden child of the Vance dynasty, was gone forever. I found my family exactly where I expected them. They were not in the private waiting room sipping coffee. They were in the main holding area near the security station, flanked by the officers who were processing their arrests. Vivian was sitting on a metal bench, her hands cuffed behind her back, her makeup smeared into a grotesque mask of despair. Marcus was standing next to her looking like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes, and Chad was pacing nervously, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. When they saw me approaching, the atmosphere shifted. Vivian sat up straighter, hope warring with hatred in her eyes. Marcus took a step forward, his hands trembling. Even Chad stopped pacing. They were waiting for the verdict. They wanted to know if their investment had survived. "She is alive," I said, my voice flat and echoing in the large space. Vivian let out a sob of relief, slumping against the wall. "Thank God. I knew you would do it, Simone. I knew you would save her. You are a good girl deep down." I held up a hand, silencing her praise. It made my skin crawl. "Do not thank me, Vivian," I said coldly. "And do not thank God. Thank modern medicine and the fact that I am very good at my job. But you need to understand something. The Jasmine you knew is dead." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, his voice raspy. "You said she is alive." "Her heart is beating," I clarified. "Her lungs are taking in oxygen with the help of a ventilator. But the damage from the toxins was catastrophic. The ammonia levels in her blood were so high for so long that her brain has suffered significant injury. She will have cognitive deficits. She will likely never walk unassisted again. Her kidneys are gone, so she will be on dialysis 3 times a week for the rest of her life, and her liver function is minimal." I looked at them, ensuring they understood the gravity of the sentence I had just pronounced. "She will require 24-hour care," I continued. "She will need a nurse to bathe her, to feed her, to change her. She is an invalid. The influencer career is over. The parties are over. She is a prisoner in her own body." Vivian began to wail, a high-pitched keening sound that drew stares from the night shift nurses. "No, not my baby. She's supposed to be a star." "She is a patient now, Vivian," I said. "And patients are expensive." I walked over to the nurses' station where my briefcase was waiting. I had asked my personal attorney to bring it over while I was in surgery. I picked it up and walked back to them. The sound of my heels clicking on the floor was the only rhythm in the room. "Speaking of expense," I said, opening the leather case, "we have some business to conclude." "Business?" Marcus asked, wiping his eyes. "Simone, now is not the time. We are being arrested. Now is exactly the time," I said. "Because once you get into the system, it becomes much harder to serve you with paperwork." I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound with a heavy binder clip. I walked over to Vivian. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What is this?" she whispered. "This is a civil lawsuit," I said, dropping the heavy stack onto her lap. The handcuffs made it impossible for her to hold it, so it slid down her legs and hit the floor with a heavy thud. "I am suing you, Vivian," I said, my voice projecting clearly, "for the misappropriation of the Clara Vance Memorial Trust, for fraud, for embezzlement, and for emotional distress." Vivian stared at the papers on the floor. "You cannot get blood from a stone, Simone. The police are freezing everything." "I know," I said, smiling humorlessly. "That is why my forensic accountants have already traced the offshore accounts where you tried to hide the money. We found the shell companies, Vivian. We found the accounts in the Cayman Islands. We know about the safety deposit boxes in Zurich." Her face went pale. The blood drained out of her so fast I thought she might faint. "I am seeking full restitution of the $3 million principal," I continued, "plus 6 years of compound interest, plus punitive damages for the breach of fiduciary duty. By the time I am done with you, Vivian, you will not even be able to afford a lawyer to defend you in your criminal trial. You will be using a public defender." "You are evil," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "You are destroying your own mother. I am recovering my assets from a thief," I corrected her. I turned to Marcus. He was watching his wife with a look of pure horror, finally realizing the extent of her deception. But he was not innocent. He had signed the papers. He had enjoyed the life. "And for you, Marcus," I said, pulling out a single envelope. It was thinner but no less deadly. I did not steal from you, Simone, he pleaded, holding up his hands. I told you I did not know. I know you didn't know about the trust fund, I said, but you did know about the loans you co-signed for Chad. I handed him the envelope. 6 months ago, Chad took out a high-interest business loan to cover his gambling losses, I explained. Since he has no credit, you co-signed it. You put the family home up as collateral, the house I grew up in, the house you kicked me out of. Marcus nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. I thought he was going to turn things around. He promised me he had a sure thing. There are no sure things in gambling, Marcus, I said. He defaulted on that loan 3 months ago. The bank was getting ready to foreclose next week. I took a step closer to him. But they won't be foreclosing, I said softly, because I bought the debt. Marcus looked at me, confusion clouding his grief. You what? I bought the note from the bank this morning, I said. I own your mortgage, Marcus. I am your lender. And since you are 90 days past due, I am exercising my right to accelerate the loan. I pointed to the envelope in his hand. That is a notice of foreclosure and eviction. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. My house, he whispered. My home. My grandfather built that house. And you gambled it away on a son-in-law who despises you, I said without pity. You have 3 days. Whatever you leave behind goes into a dumpster. I suggest you call a moving truck as soon as you post bail. If you can post bail. Marcus collapsed onto the bench next to Vivian, burying his face in his hands. The two of them sat there, the king and queen of a crumbled empire bound by handcuffs and ruin. Finally, I turned to Chad. He was standing near the water fountain, trying to look invisible. When he saw me looking at him, he stood up straight, trying to summon some of that toxic masculinity he used to mask his insecurity. Look, Simone. He started, his voice shaky. I know you are mad, but you cannot sue me. I have nothing. I am broke, remember. You said it yourself. I walked over to him, stopping just inches away. I could smell the stale sweat of fear on him. I know you are broke, Chad, I said. And I know you are a fraud. But I also know what is in that duffel bag you insisted on bringing to the hospital. He froze. His eyes darted to the black gym bag sitting at his feet. I do not know what you are talking about, he stammered. It is just gym clothes. My private investigator is very thorough, I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. He told me about your little side hustle. Since the gambling money ran out, you started moving product for a local dealer to make ends meet. OxyContin, fentanyl. That bag isn't full of gym clothes, Chad. It is full of distribution-weight narcotics. Chad stopped breathing. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. You are crazy, he whispered. Am I? I asked, raising my voice slightly. Officer, I think you might want to check this gentleman's bag. I believe he might be bringing contraband into a hospital. Chad panic spiked. He looked at the police officers who were busy with Vivian and Marcus. They hadn't looked at the bag yet. I looked at my watch. Here is the deal, Chad, I said quietly. You are not family. You are just a mistake my sister made. I do not care if you go to prison or if you disappear. Personally, I prefer you disappear. It saves me the paperwork. I looked at the automatic doors leading to the parking lot. You have 30 seconds, I said. If you walk out those doors right now and leave the bag. I will not say a word to the officers. You leave town. You never contact Jasmine again. You never contact me again. You run back to whatever hole you crawled out of. But if you stay, I continued, taking out my phone. I tell them to open that bag, and with the amount you are holding, you will be looking at 20 years mandatory minimum. Chad looked at the bag. He looked at the police officers. He looked at his wife's parents weeping on the bench. And then he looked at me. He saw the ice in my eyes. He saw that I was not bluffing. He saw that I was the predator, and he was the prey. You are a monster, he whispered. I am a surgeon, I replied. I cut out the rot. And you are the rot. Chad didn't hesitate. He didn't say goodbye to Marcus. He didn't look at Vivian. He turned and sprinted toward the automatic doors. He ran like the coward he was, leaving his life, his wife and his felony narcotics charge sitting on the floor of the hospital waiting room. I watched him go. Good riddance, officer, I called out, turning to the nearest policeman. Yes, Dr. Vance, the officer asked, stepping forward. I pointed to the black duffel bag Chad had abandoned. The gentleman who just left forgot his bag, I said, and I think I saw some white powder spilling out of it. You might want to secure that. It looks like evidence. The officer's eyes widened. He signaled his partner and they moved toward the bag. I picked up my briefcase and turned back to my parents. They were watching me with a mixture of awe and terror. They had created me. They had abused me. And now they were being dismantled by me. I have to go do rounds now, I said, checking my watch as if this were just another appointment. The nurses will update you on Jasmine's condition if you manage to make bail. But do not try to visit her. I have put a restricted access order on her room. Only medical staff allowed. But we are her parents, Vivian sobbed. You are the reason she is in that bed, I said. You are a health hazard, Vivian, and my hospital has a strict policy against hazards. I turned and walked away. I did not look back at the handcuffs. I did not look back at the tears. I walked toward the elevators that would take me back to the penthouse level. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the bank. The wire transfer for the purchase of the mortgage note had cleared. I owned their house. I owned their debt. And effectively, I owned them. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close, shutting out the sight of my former family. The silence was beautiful. I leaned my head back against the cool metal wall and closed my eyes. I was exhausted. My body ached from the surgery. My heart ached from the betrayal. But my conscience was clear. I had settled the bill. The debt was paid. And now it was time to collect the interest. The automatic doors of the hospital entrance slid open, and the humid Atlanta night air hit me like a physical weight. It was a stark contrast to the refrigerated sterility of the operating room, but it smelled like freedom. I walked toward the valet stand, digging in my purse for my ticket. My shift was over. My family was dismantled. I was ready to go home to my penthouse, pour a real glass of wine, and sleep for a week. But the universe had one last conversation waiting for me. Simone. The voice came from the shadows near the concrete pillar. It was weak, trembling, and stripped of all the pompous authority it had carried for 30 years. I stopped and turned. Marcus Vance stepped into the light of the street lamp. He looked like a ghost. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie was missing, and his face was gray with exhaustion. He had been processed and released pending his arraignment, probably because he had no prior record and posed no flight risk. But the man who stood before me was not the deacon who judged people from the front pew. He was a beggar. I did not say anything. I just looked at him, waiting. They took Vivian, he said, his voice cracking. They denied her bail. They said the flight risk was too high because of the offshore accounts. She is in a cell, Simone. Your mother is sleeping on a concrete cot tonight. I tightened my grip on my purse. She is not my mother, Marcus. And she is sleeping exactly where she belongs. He flinched as if I had struck him. He took a few steps closer, his hands reaching out but stopping short of touching me. I know you are angry, he said. You have every right to be. We failed you. I failed you. But please, Simone, have mercy on the living. I raised an eyebrow. Mercy. The house, he whispered. The foreclosure notice you gave me. Please do not do it. That house is all I have left. My father built the frame of that house with his own hands in 1960. It is the family legacy. If you take the house, I have nowhere to go. Vivian is in jail. Chad is gone. I am an old man, Simone. Do not put me on the street. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had watched his wife throw my clothes into the snow 6 years ago and did nothing. I looked at the man who had signed away my inheritance to fund a gambler's lifestyle because he was too weak to say no. Legacy. I repeated, letting the word roll around my mouth like a bad taste. You talk about legacy, Marcus. Let me tell you what I am going to do with your legacy. I took a step forward, forcing him to look me in the eye. You have 1 week, I said. 7 days. Not a minute more. You will pack your personal effects. Clothes, photos, books, anything of actual value you leave behind. The furniture, the art, the silver. That belongs to the bank now, which means it belongs to me. He started to cry soft, pathetic sobs that shook his shoulders. But I will have nothing. Where will I go? That is not my problem, I said. But I want you to know why I am doing this. I am not going to live in that house, Marcus. I would burn it down before I slept under that roof again. I paused, letting the next words sink in. I am going to sell it. I am going to sell it for market value, and I am going to take every penny of the profit along with the $3 million I am going to strip from Vivian's hidden accounts, and I am going to start a foundation. He looked up, confusion mixing with his grief. A foundation? The Clara Vance Scholarship Fund, I said. It will be a full-ride scholarship for medical students, but not just any students. It will be specifically for students who have been disowned by their families, for the black sheep, for the scapegoats, for the kids whose parents kicked them out because they didn't fit the perfect image. I smiled, and it was sharp. Your house is going to pay for the tuition of children you would have looked down on. Your legacy is going to be funding the success of people like me. Every time you drive past that house, you will know that it no longer shelters your lies. It funds the truth. Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He realized the totality of my revenge. I was not just taking his money, I was rewriting his history. You are cruel, he whispered. You are colder than she ever was. I am a surgeon, Marcus, I replied, turning away. I cut out the infection to save the patient. You and Vivian were the infection. And I am finally cured. I signaled the valet who brought my Porsche around. I got in without looking back at him, leaving him standing on the curb, a king without a kingdom. But I could not leave yet. There was one more room I had to visit, one more cord to cut. I drove the car around to the physician's parking deck and took the service elevator back up. Not to the trauma bay, but to the ICU. The intensive care unit was quiet. The lights were dimmed and the only sound was the rhythmic whoosh of ventilators and the steady beep of cardiac monitors. I walked past the nurse's station, nodding to the night charge nurse, who knew better than to ask why I was there. Room number 8. I pushed the door open gently. Jasmine was awake. She looked tiny in the hospital bed, engulfed by tubes and wires. The ventilator had been removed, but she was still on oxygen. Her skin was still yellow, but the dialysis machine next to the bed was humming, spinning her blood, cleaning out the poison she had willingly ingested. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. She tried to lift her hand, but she was too weak. The restraints held her wrist gently to the rail. Simone. She rasped, her voice a dry croak. I walked to the foot of the bed. I did not sit down. I kept my distance. The distance between a doctor and a patient. The distance between a stranger and a stranger. Where is Chad? She whispered. Where is Mom? Mom is in federal custody, I said simply. And Chad is likely halfway to Mexico by now. He ran Jasmine. I gave him a choice between you and his freedom. He chose freedom. He left his drug bag in the lobby and sprinted out the door. Jasmine closed her eyes, the tears leaking out and sliding into her ears. He left me. He was never really with you, I said. He was with the money. And the money is gone. She opened her eyes and looked at me. There was fear there, but also a glimmer of that old entitlement. The belief that somehow I would fix it. Because I always fixed it. I was the big sister. I was the responsible one. I am sorry, she said. The words sounded foreign on her tongue. I am so sorry, Simone. I did not know about the adoption. I did not know about the money. I wanted to be thin. I wanted people to like me. I was so scared of losing everything. She tried to reach for me again. Please, Simone. Do not leave me here alone. I am scared. I will be better, I promise. We can be sisters again. You are all I have left. I looked at her. I looked at the girl I had protected on the playground. The girl I had helped with homework. The girl who had forged an email to get me kicked out of school. The girl who had laughed while I was homeless. I walked to the side of the bed. Jasmine's face lit up with hope. She thought I was coming to hold her hand. She thought I was coming to comfort her. I reached out and adjusted the flow rate on her IV drip. I checked the catheter bag. I checked the display on the dialysis machine. My movements were precise, clinical, and devoid of warmth. "I am not leaving you, Jasmine," I said, my voice steady. "I am your doctor. I will oversee your recovery. I will make sure you get the best physical therapy. I will manage your dialysis schedule. I will ensure you survive this." I finished checking the equipment and stepped back, but that is all I am. Jasmine's face crumbled. But we are sisters." "No," I said. "We are not. Sisters protect each other. Sisters do not steal from each other. Sisters do not watch each other freeze in the snow and laugh." I looked her dead in the eye. "The sister you are looking for died 6 years ago, Jasmine. You and your mother killed her the night you put my suitcases on the porch. I am Dr. Vance. And Dr. Vance saves lives, but she does not resurrect relationships." "But I am alone," she sobbed. "I cannot do this alone." "You will have to learn," I said. "Just like I did." I turned around and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard her crying, calling my name, begging me to come back. Begging me to be the doormat I used to be. But I did not stop. I walked out of the ICU and down the long hallway. The hospital was waking up. The early morning shift was arriving. The smell of coffee was starting to replace the smell of antiseptic. I stepped out of the hospital doors for the second time that night. This time the sky was not black. It was turning a soft, bruised purple, bleeding into pink at the horizon. The sun was coming up over Atlanta. I walked to my car and got in. I sat there for a moment in the silence. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my real estate agent confirming the listing appointment for the Vance family home. Another text from my lawyer confirming the asset freeze. I put the phone down and started the engine. The Porsche purred to life, a sound of power and engineering perfection. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw my own eyes. They were tired, yes, but they were clear. There was no more confusion, no more longing for a family that never existed. I was an orphan by blood, but a survivor by choice. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the lot, leaving the hospital behind me. I had a busy week ahead. I had a house to sell, a scholarship to found, and a life, my own life, to finally live. I drove toward the sunrise, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't look back. The wine glass clinked softly against the marble coaster. It was a sound of finality, a period at the end of a very long and very painful sentence. I stood up from the sofa and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city of Atlanta was spread out below me, a grid of golden lights breathing in the humid night. From up here, the cars looked like toys, and the people were invisible. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was everything my life had never been until now. It has been 1 year since that night in the hospital. 1 year since I cut the cancer out of my life. And I know you are wondering what happened to the patients I left behind. You want to know if the surgery was successful. You want to know if the infection returned. Let us start with Vivian. My mother, or rather, my aunt, the woman who loved labels and luxury, found herself with a new label. Inmate number 7429. The forensic accountants did their job well. They found every dime she had siphoned from my trust fund. They found the shell companies. They found the tax evasion. The judge was not impressed by her tears or her Bible verses. He called her a predator who ate her own young. He sentenced her to 10 years in a federal correctional facility. I heard through my lawyer that she is having a hard time adjusting. Apparently, the prison uniforms are not designer, and the other inmates do not appreciate her advice on etiquette. She sends me letters sometimes, long, rambling letters written on yellow legal paper begging for commissary money. She tells me she prays for me. I do not read them. I run them through the shredder unopened. The sound of the paper tearing is the only prayer I need. Then there is Marcus. The man who was so terrified of losing his grandfather's house lost it 3 days after he made bail. I followed through on my promise. I evicted him. I sold the house to a developer who bulldozed it to build modern condos. The physical structure of my trauma is gone, wiped from the earth. Marcus tried to move in with Chad, but Chad was gone. He tried to move in with friends from church, but nobody wanted to harbor a man involved in a high-profile fraud case. He ended up in a state-run assisted living facility on the outskirts of the city. It is a gray, depressing place that smells of boiled cabbage and neglect. I pay the bill for his room, not because I care, but because I want him to know that every bite of food he eats is provided by the daughter he rejected. It is the ultimate power move. He lives because I allow it, and he hates every minute of it. Chad never made it to Mexico. The police found him at the bus station 2 hours after he ran out of the hospital. He was trying to buy a ticket to El Paso with a stolen credit card. The K-9 unit found the narcotics in his bag at the hospital, and a subsequent search of his apartment found enough fentanyl to put him away for a very long time. He took a plea deal to avoid 20 years. He is currently serving 8 years in a medium-security prison. I heard his wife divorced him in absentia. And finally Jasmine, my sister, my cousin, the golden child. She survived the night, but she did not survive intact. The toxins destroyed her body just as I predicted. She lost 60% of her liver function. Her kidneys never recovered. She spends 4 hours a day, 3 days a week hooked up to a dialysis machine. The ammonia that flooded her brain caused permanent cognitive slowing. She is not the sharp, manipulative girl she used to be. She is quiet. She is slow. She is confused. She lives in a small, subsidized apartment near the dialysis center. She lives on a disability check that barely covers her rent. The friends who used to party with her are gone. The followers who used to like her photos have moved on to the next influencer. She is alone. I saw her once about 6 months ago. I was driving past a bus stop and I saw a woman in a wheelchair waiting for the transit van. She looked old. Her skin was still sallow. Her hair was thin. It took me a moment to realize it was Jasmine. I slowed down my car. Our eyes met for a split second. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with a profound, empty sadness. I didn't stop. I kept driving. I am her doctor, not her savior. I saved her life, but I cannot save her from the reality she created. As for the money, the $3 million I recovered plus the profit from the sale of the house went exactly where I said it would. The Clara Vance Scholarship Fund sent its first 3 students to medical school this fall. 3 brilliant young women who had been kicked out of their homes for being gay, for being pregnant, or for simply being different. I read their essays. I cried over their stories. And then I signed the checks that would change their lives. That is the real legacy. That is the real victory. I took a sip of my wine and felt the cool breeze on my face. The door behind me slid open. I didn't turn around. I knew the footsteps. They were heavy but gentle, solid, grounded. Strong arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me back against a warm chest. I leaned into the embrace. "You are thinking about them again, aren't you?" a deep voice asked. I turned in his arms. David looked down at me with eyes that saw everything. He was not a gambler. He was not a fraud. He was an architect. A man who built things designed to last. A man who understood structure and foundation. We met 6 months ago at a charity auction for the scholarship fund. He didn't know who my family was, and he didn't care. He loved me for the scar on my soul, not the size of my bank account. "Just reminding myself how far I have come," I said softly. He kissed my forehead. "You are not there anymore, Simone. You are here, with me. We are building something new. Remember?" I nodded. We were. We were building a life based on truth, on respect, on choice. I looked out at the city one last time. The lights blurred slightly as my eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude. I was grateful for the pain. I was grateful for the rejection. Because without it, I might have stayed in that toxic house trying to buy their love. I might have ended up like Jasmine Hollow and Fake. The collapse of my family was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stand on my own 2 feet. It forced me to realize my own worth. I turned back to the camera looking directly at you. Do not let anyone tell you that family is everything. Do not let them tell you that blood is a binding contract. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones who are holding the knife. Sometimes family is just the first test of your life. It is the fire you have to walk through to find out who you really are. It is the exam that measures your strength, your resilience, and your ability to love yourself when no one else will. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean air of freedom. My name is Dr. Simone Vance. I walked through the fire. I passed the test. And I graduated with honors. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a heart monitor beating strong and steady.